Commissioner Irwin,
Present.
Commissioner Hirschbein,
Present.
Commissioner Lewin,
Present.
Commissioner Song,
Present.
Vice Chair Maruzzi,
Here.
and Chair Wermuck.
Present.
Okay.
Thank you. Can we have a report on the acceptance of the agenda? If anybody is not muted, would you mute your, Michael, would you mute your, I think, because we're getting a echo. Okay. We have an agenda. Do I have a motion for an acceptance of the agenda?
Madam Chair, before you do the acceptance of the agenda, I need to give a brief report on the posting of the agenda. The agenda was posted on Thursday, July the 2nd. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law. Madam Chair, under the acceptance of the agenda, the applicant for item 2A has withdrawn the application. Consequently, we will not need to take any action on agenda item 2A.
Thank you. Can I get a motion on the acceptance of the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Paul Lewin will second the motion.
Thank you. Can you call the roll? Or can we just say aye?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry.
There are no dissents.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Before I open public comment,
Oh.
thanks. Before I open public comment, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment in the public comment period?
Madam Chair, no members of the public have signed up for public comment under this portion of the agenda.
Then I will both open and close public comment. The next is item 1, which is the consent calendar. It's the approval of the minutes of June 10, 2020. Can I get a motion on this, or does anyone have any modifications?
I'll make a motion to accept.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Can you call the roll on this?
Sorry.
Can we just
Commissioner
say
Irwin?
aye?
Aye.
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 Oh, they're saying aye.
Okay, the next item is item 2B. This is a public hearing item. It is King's Garden LLC requesting a variance to 1, omit parking lot landscaping and shade requirements, and 2, approve a security fence installed in wrong location at the King's Garden Corporate Center, a cannabis-related use located at 19533 McLean Road. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Commissioners. I think we're trying to get some graphics up on the screen that would just familiarize yourselves with the site, but let me dive into the staff report, and if we can get the graphics back up, I'll walk you through those. This is a variance application that has 2 components. Oh, here we go on the slides. Let me just run through these very quickly, and I'll familiarize yourself with the project, and then I'll jump back into the staff report. So this is the site. You can see in this image, the building is in the lower portion of the screen, and the parking lot in question is along the upper roughly half of the site. The street, which is McLean Road, is at the right side of the image, and it's a corner lot basically at the knuckle of the corner of the street. The 2 images here are of the parking lot. looking at along the north elevation of the building. The upper image that is indicated as 2019 shows the landscaping that was on the site at that time. And subsequently, as you can see in the photo labeled 2020, all of the landscaping in the parking lot has been removed. This is the front of the building, and there are two things that I will bring your attention to here. This image shows the fence that's part of this particular variance request, and it shows also the front landscape area in which the landscape material has also been completely removed. And that's the end of the slides. So there's two components to this variance, and I might recommend at the Commission's pleasure that you perhaps take these one at a time. So maybe we want to look at the parking lot landscaping question first. The zoning code, section 93.06, requires a minimum of 50% shade for parking lots that have 50 spaces or more. That is what this parking lot does have. The shade can be provided either via the placement of shade trees or the installation of parking lot shade structures, in other words, carports. The applicant is requesting approval to not install any of the landscaping or the shade trees in the parking lot. There is an image in your packets of a diagram, a landscape plan that does show a proposed area along the street frontage in which the applicant is proposing a small scattering of low types of plants, agave and so on. The issue here before us came to the attention of staff when we were out in 2019 to do a final inspection. This particular applicant is occupying an existing building, and the building was built in 2004, but the applicant has just recently renovated the building and taken the entire building over for their operational use. So at the time that we went out to do the final inspection, it was noted that the landscaping on the site, as you can see in the image on page 3 of your staff report, was in some rather disarray and lacking of maintenance. So we identified that as things that they needed to deal with in order to complete the project and allow us to do the final sign-off. The Planning Commission at the time, in April of 2019, agreed to accept a performance bond because the applicant was ready to occupy the building. They were eager to seek their certificate of occupancy. And so a practice which is not uncommon under these circumstances was that the city asked the applicant to post a bond, quote unquote, a check, if you will, as security that they would promise to install the and replace the missing landscaping material in exchange for allowing them to have their occupancy certificate signed off before the landscaping was installed. On May 6th of 2019, the applicant submitted a letter to the then building official, Gil Estrada, outlining the work that was necessary for the city to issue the temporary certificate of occupancy. In that letter, the applicant stated, and this letter is in your packet as well, the letter stated, King's Garden agrees to put the landscape back to its original condition based on the original approved site plan dated 2004. So we will provide a bond of $3,000 to cover the cost of replacing the dead and missing plants and cleaning out the islands. Subsequently, in May of 2020, the planning department staff inspected the site and observed that all of the plant material in the parking lot and the front landscaping strip had been removed, including the existing shade trees. In its place, decomposed granite had been spread, and the landscape peninsulas, DG had been spread in both the landscape peninsulas in the parking lot and the front landscape strip along McLean Road, as you saw in the previous photo. On page 4 of your staff report, there is the image that you see of the existing conditions on the upper two photos in 2019, and then the lower image, which you saw earlier, where all of the landscaping has been removed. When this was brought or came to the staff's attention, the applicant explained that they had removed the landscaping and trees because it was an issue and a concern for them and their security. We discussed this at the time, and I explained that the staff does not have authority to waive the landscaping requirements, but that we could certainly work with the applicant to adjust the landscaping requirements, perhaps in such a way that all of the understory shrubs and low-level plantings where people could perhaps hide out or not be seen by their security system could perhaps be eliminated as long as they were able to reinstate all of the shade trees. And the applicant has requested that that not be the case. They would prefer to not install any of the shade trees, citing the issues of security, and also the fact that the area is a very windy part of town, as you know, on the north side of the 10, and they felt that it would be futile to try to put in trees again, given the windy conditions there. So the first part of the application in their request for variation is to request that they not have to put in any of the landscaping other than the minimal amount that they've shown scattered along the front of the proposed setback. The variance findings, and as you know, with a variance, all 4 of the state mandated findings must be affirmatively made in order to grant the variance. So the variance findings for the analysis of the landscape begins in your staff report on page 8. And we've reviewed these variance findings, and I'm not going to read through them all, but we were not able to affirmatively meet or make the findings in the case of the request for the removal of the trees. And I will just point out some of those areas, in particular, the granting of the variance will not affect the general plan. Number 4, I've noted some of the statements of policies and action items from the general plan in which the city has set out a vision that these areas that are industrial be improved to the extent possible so that they are in keeping with the resort nature of the city. So the first part of this application that we have reviewed at a staff level is we do not believe that the findings for the variance application to remove all the landscaping and shade trees can be met. On to the second part of the variance. The applicant, also in concerns of security, requested the installation of a security fence. This fence was processed through the planning department as a staff level approval, noting in the approval that the fence must not encroach into the front yard setback any further than allowed by the zoning code. We believe in looking at this, and I would just sort of point out on the applicant's material, part of what led to the ambiguity and I think their perhaps unintentional error in the placement of this fence is on their drawings they had dimensioned the front yard setback from the curb. And as we know, most of the roadway right-of-ways extend beyond the curb into usually the front yard landscape areas a bit. And that is the case in this instance. The zoning code requires in the industrial zones that fences may be installed in front yards, however, they may not encroach into the front yard more than 5 feet. In this case, the fencing was erroneously located 15 feet into the front yard setback. This, we believe, was due in part to existing conditions that the occupant and applicant were contending with. That is, that there is a row of parking spaces that front that particular part of the lot. Those parking spaces, along with the main body of parking in the parking lot that you saw in the aerial photo to the north of the site, are required based on the occupancy type and uses. So they were not able to reduce or eliminate those parking spaces in order to put the fence in the proper location. In reviewing the variance findings in this particular part of the application, we do believe that the variance findings can be met because of the existing conditions that are such that the ability to put in that security fence would have otherwise required the removal of the parking spaces and then left them with a deficient amount of parking spaces. So that concludes my staff report. And I'll answer any questions you may have. The applicant will be available to also present the project, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Again, our recommendation is that the Planning Commission deny the variance application and require them to at least put in the shade trees in the parking lot, and then on the fence variance application, that the Planning Commission can affirmatively make the findings to allow that fencing to remain in its location. That concludes my staff report. Thank you.
Mr. Lyons, before we begin questions, could you show us on the map exactly what the intrusion is and where it starts and where it intrudes?
Yes, if I can get IT to bring us back up the, looks like it's coming here. Bear with us just a moment. There we go. So beginning here with the aerial site plan, the front of the lot is at the right side of this photo. You can see the blackness of the McLean Road, and you can see the parking spaces that are aligned across the front of the lot. The distance from that front of the nose end, if you will, of those parking spaces is about 10 feet to where the property line actually is located, thus causing about a 15-foot encroachment into the front yard. On this photo here, what you're seeing there is the front yard landscape strip in the decomposed granite that you see there, and also where their white sign is located. And you can see the parking spaces that were existing at the time that the fencing was installed. So that those are the images that are best to explain and describe or show those existing conditions. Does that help?
Members of the commission, does that answer your question? Commissioner Song.
Thank you very much. Can you explain if carports were considered as part of the solution to meet the shading requirements?
We did explain that either landscaping or carport structures could provide the required shade. The applicant in this case felt that the installation of carport structures would be cost prohibitive, and therefore they did not wish to do that.
And the second question about the fence location, are those spaces in which it will be lost if the fence were to move in this proper location, would that reduction not meet the requirement of parking spaces for this use?
That's correct. If they were to lose the 15 or so parking spaces across the front of the parcel, they would wind up with a deficient number of parking spaces based on the usage and the calculations that the zoning code requires.
Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Maruzzi?
So Ken, what would then be the option if they don't meet the parking requirements?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Maruzzi, I wasn't able to hear you. Could you repeat that?
Sure. What then would be the requirements for parking, or how could we deal with the issue of insufficient parking if 15 spaces were lost?
In other words, what could they do to accommodate the loss of spaces? Is that what you're asking?
I'm nodding, yes.
The parking ordinance allows, via the application of an administrative minor modification, a reduction of parking spaces by about 10%. In this case, the number of parking spaces that would be lost by removing them across the front would exceed that. So they would actually have to remove more than the 10% that would be allowed by an administrative minor modification. we've not gone into a full-fledged discussion and analysis of the number of parking spaces that they quote-unquote need based on their operational program. But the number of parking spaces required by what the ordinance dictates would be lost.
And Madam Chair, if I can just jump in, they could apply for a variance from parking requirements to address the deficiency of parking as well.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Hirschfein?
Thank you. I've got two questions. The first one, could you put up an aerial view of the site again for me, please?
Sure. Okay.
So, the shade requirement you're talking about is applicable to the entire lot, is that correct? Not just the front area?
Not just the front area, no, it would be applicable to the entire lot. 50% of the entire lot would require shade.
Okay. And then in terms of this bond, I think you said so-called bond, and then you said a check. Is it money the city currently has deposited in their general fund, or are they just holding a check uncashed? What's the status of that?
When a performance or a completion bond of this nature is made, the city receives it and it's placed in a deposit account, so it does not go into the general fund, but it's held in a deposit account that is typical for this kind of bond.
So it's not really a bond, it's just some money that the applicant submitted to the city holding pending the final outcome, is that right?
That's correct. The basic concept is that the city would require the bond or the deposit in the approximate amount of the work that is not complete at the time of the certificate of occupancy. We estimated very roughly that about $3,000 was probably about what it would take to put the trees and things in that they would need, and that was the amount that was settled upon.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Lewin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow up on, I think, Commissioner Maruzzi's question about the fencing, isn't there another alternative? And I'm not suggesting, I just want to make sure that we understand this, that they're just not allowed to put the fence there, or they only fence a portion of their parking lot, and therefore they wouldn't run out of any, they wouldn't lose any parking spaces. They would just have a smaller fenced area.
The difficulty on that, Commissioner Lewin, is that the circulation pattern, the drive aisles, the access onto the public street would make it infeasible to fence only a portion. There's the existing conditions in the site just don't allow there to be a partial sectioning off or a partial fencing of the lot. It becomes very difficult in terms of how you arrange the gates and that kind of thing.
Thank you. That's my only question, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ken.
Commissioner Irvin, do you have a question in this?
No, I do not.
Ken, I have a couple about the landscaping. If we turn down, what is the impact of us accepting the staff report and turning down the request to get rid of the shade? Would they have to put back in the original landscaping? What exactly would happen, or is the impact that code enforcement can then go out and enforce the missing landscape?
The parking ordinance describes in a general way the parking lot landscaping that's required, and it talks about landscaping in the front parkway, and it talks about landscaping in the various peninsula islands in the lot. And it typically is comprised of both the trees that would be required for shade, as well as the low-level shrubs and ground covers that would be necessary from an aesthetic point of view. It would be if the commission chose to act affirmatively on the denial of the variance request and require the landscaping to be installed, I believe the commission could take discretion and work with the applicant or direct staff to work with the applicant to put in enough landscaping to provide the shade that the code requires, but eliminate the understory shrubs and other materials that could be potential security issues and concerns for the applicant. We want to work with this applicant, recognizing their security concerns, but also recognizing the need in the zoning code and the general plan for enhancements of this type in an industrial area.
And following that with a question, so can the city, with the bond that it holds, put the trees in? If the applicant isn't amenable to...
I don't have the precise answer to that because I don't know what the cost of a tree is. My basic hunch is that it would not be sufficient to put the required trees in because at the time that the bond was required, there were some trees still surviving in the lot. Now there are no trees in the lot, and I doubt that $3,000 would be adequate to provide the code required parking shade.
And when I drove around the facility, I saw almost every place in that vicinity had live trees that were thriving. Do you agree with the applicant that trees wouldn't thrive or couldn't thrive there if they were appropriately chosen and appropriately watered?
My personal opinion is that I believe that shade trees can survive despite the harsh environmental conditions on the north side of the 10, as you've mentioned, as evidenced by other properties in the area that do have trees. Certainly, it's necessary to provide an adequate irrigation system and to provide very aggressive staking to help the trees establish themselves and maintain a vertical orientation. So I believe, it's my opinion, that shade trees could survive in this area if they're properly installed and maintained.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We can move from this to the public hearing on this item. The applicant has 10 minutes, and then members of the public who wish to testify have 3 minutes, and the applicant will have 3 minutes of rebuttal. Director Fagg, are there any members is the applicant prepared to testify? And are there any members of the public who wish to testify?
Madam Chair, we have the applicant on the line. The applicant will have 10 minutes to make his presentation to the Planning Commission. We don't have any other members of the public who wish to speak under this public hearing item, so we'll ask the applicant to stay on the line afterward for any questions that the Planning Commission may have. Mr. LaSalle, you are live with the Planning Commission, and you have 10 minutes to make your presentation. You may go ahead.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, thank you for looking at this variance request that we provided. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to Ken Lyons, who's really been instrumental in helping us out with this project. He's been extremely helpful, and we've been able to get to the point where we're at right now. I heard a lot of things in the staff report and a lot of opinions based on zoning codes and whatnot, and all respected. But what we have here in our facility, which has been an ever-evolving project, starting with half the building, then took 2/3 of the building, and then ended up taking the whole building. You know, our company, King's Garden, we are, if not one of the largest indoor cannabis cultivators in the state of California. We have a very, very large presence all up and down the state. Security is a main objective for all of our facilities. We take it extremely serious. In the last few months, we've we've had to hire additional security, armed guards. We have 4 guards during working hours. We have 3 24/7. Our facility is located within 50 feet of one of the largest homeless shelters that will be coming online for the Riverside County. We have had several occurrences with unfortunate vagrants coming onto our property. We've had to call the police. We've had homeless camps. We have graffiti that is being tagged on the west side of the property. They take pallets, they climb over the wall, they jump the wall. And all of this means to us is we need to have all eyes possible. We've installed a security system per, the city of Palm Springs and the police department requirements, and then we go over and above that. We have over 120 cameras at this facility. We want to see everything. We need to see everything. We have the attitude of not if it's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. Unfortunately, these are the times that we're living in. In the last couple of months, there have been over 40 cannabis companies throughout the country that have been targeted in robberies, whether it be a single person robbery or in excess of 10 people coordinating a sense of robbery. We've on an addendum to our justification letter, I listed all of the locations in our immediate areas from Los Angeles to San Francisco to Oakland that were targeted and robbed. And our company here, this particular facility, we are the hub of approximately 300,000 square feet of indoor grow between Cathedral City and Palm Springs. Everything comes here. Product comes here. It goes out from here. The money comes into here. We're dealing with millions of dollars that come in and out of this property via cash, as you guys know, because they see the tax dollars that we pay each month. It's scary. And so we do everything that we possibly can. And when it came time to the landscape, again, in every evolving process here, when we took over the property, the landscape was in total disarray. Live plants, dead plants, live trees, dead trees. All the foliage that were against the wrought iron fence on the north of the property was dead and gone and whatnot. And so as we moved forward, we took it upon ourselves to remove all of the dead trees along with the few remaining live trees, cleaned up all of the landscape, put in DG, and we wanted to make it a clean, a very clean look amongst the community around us. Now, I know, Commissioner, you had mentioned that you had visited the site around us, and there are some trees that are thriving. And yes, you are correct. There are some trees that are thriving. But a lot of those trees that I see that are thriving aren't necessarily shade trees. I see a lot of palm trees those things, I don't even know how they don't blow over in the wind that's out here of 50 mile an hour plus. But they do survive, but they're not shade trees. The shade trees that I see are just, they're sporadic, they're not maintained. I don't know how they can be maintained to the point of making them look decent enough to where even though they might thrive or live, they're just not going to look good. Low-level plants, the sand from the desert just builds up on all of the brims and all of the plants, and it just covers them all. And you could see that throughout our area. And when it came time to the 4 different processes that Ken was talking about that need to meet this in order for the variance to go through, I understand that. Ken's a lot smarter man than me, and I don't understand a lot of that verbiage. But at the same time, we are different than the other businesses that are around us. There isn't one business that is literally in our vicinity here that is identical to us. There might be another cultivator, but there's not another cultivator that deals with the amount of product, with the amount of money, and the amount of employees, and the amount of security that we need to have at this particular facility. The police department, we've got a great relationship with. They love our security systems. They love when we have somebody jumping our walls, trying to steal trash out of our trash cans, or coming onto our site, able to pull up a video of a clear picture, not, dodging around trees or whatever else might be there. So then when Ken and I were talking, and then he brought to our attention maybe some recommendations of some other facilities with trees and whatnot. Again, I went back really adamant that shade structures and trees, shade trees per se, within our property, we feel is extremely detrimental to our staff. However, if we brighten up, so to speak, McLean Street, the frontage road out there, throw in some of those agave plants and those aloe plants and some big boulders and maybe some river rock through there to really dress that up. So it looks like as you're touring the industrial area that's out here. And again, it is industrial. This is not open to the public. It's not one of those types of facilities, but at least it looks good as you're going through. It might be barren, as Ken mentioned in his staff report, on the inside. Barren on the outside right now, we would be happy to improve that outside, but barren on the inside, not because it looks the best, but it looks clean, it's well maintained, and it provides the security for our staff, our employees, our security guards, everybody around us. I mean, we try to be good neighbors. We're gonna do our best to be good neighbors with the county of Riverside and their endeavor that's going to be opening up real soon. We're going to be able to do some co-partnering on security. They're going to love having the ability to come and view our security cameras, to be able to see their entire facility on the outside in between the two buildings if they ever have any issues. So we just, again, I can't stress it enough. We want to work with the city. We've got a good relationship with the city, and everybody works well together. But the shade trees that were presented, the way they look, the ones that were there, although not maintained, as you can see, they're big and ruly from that aerial footage, but they don't provide shade. There's no shade around there whatsoever. And so when we talk 50% shade structures with trees of that nature, it really doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. Aesthetically, I understand, but where we're at, weather-wise, extreme conditions, born and raised out here myself. I'm a definite Palm Springs guy, born at Desert Hospital, and whether you have a car parked under a shade and the car next to it's parked in the sun, in the summertime it's hot. It's hot no matter which way you look at it. So we do our best to provide with what we can for our employees, and we try and go over and above what we can do or what we need to do. And again, not trying to discount zoning codes and regulations, but really want the city to take a look at what we currently have as a company, as a very high-risk company. We've got vendors that come into town to pick up product, to pick up, to drop off cash. I mean, it's scary. And we've got armed guards that are watching out at any given time, and anytime that there's somewhere that they could hide, they're going to hide, and it just makes it a lot more difficult for everyone to be able to do their job safe and effective. I think that's what I've got to say. And as far as the fence goes, as you can see by that aerial, we push that fence as far as we possibly can to the curb inside of the, where the parking lot is, without infringing on the existing parking spots. That was something that Ken and I had worked on prior to this in regards to occupancies and parking lot and parking spaces. It was very difficult to get what we already have here, and and the ability to lose some because of the fence would have been extremely detrimental to the spaces that were required for this type of occupancy. And so we pushed it to the curb as far as we possibly could. It can't go any further. And that was the decision on the fence. So thank you. I appreciate everybody's hard work and efforts in these trying times.
Mr. LaSalle, your time has concluded. Madam Chair,
Thank you.
that concludes public comment. Mr. LaSalle, if you'll stay on the line in case Planning Commission has any questions for you.
Yes, sir.
What I'd like to do is stop the questions from the Planning Commission while the public hearing is open, starting with Commissioner Maruzzi. Do you have any questions?
The only question I have is why there's a concern that the county facility will cause so many problems. I mean, homeless people aren't per se thieves. It just seems to be an odd thing to throw in there, given your other concerns.
Mr. LaSalle.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. I'm having a really hard time hearing.
Mr. LaSalle, the question was the concern relative to the homeless individuals at the county facility. Why do you feel that that would impact your facility?
It's unfortunate. It's completely unfortunate, and we do whatever we can to help out wherever we can. But it is a fact that homelessness is there's a lot of mental illness out there, and what we've experienced coming from that particular facility onto our property hasn't been it's been a security issue, you know, where our security guards had to get involved. We've had to call police, and I mean, they set up their homeless camps out in front. A lot of them, unfortunately, it appears that they're either I hate to say it and not sound unsensitive, because I really have a soft spot for this, but it's an issue. It's an issue that I think that we all know as part of good citizens that it can bring a part of criminal activity to the area unwarranted.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Song?
How many employees do you have working in one shift?
Commissioner Song?
How many employees do you have working in one shift?
Mr. LaSalle, did you hear the question?
Yeah, yes, I did. Thank you. At any given time, we have approximately, in this particular facility, overall, just south of 100 employees. We do work two shifts. The second shift is a lot less. The second shift, we're probably looking at about 30 total.
So you being local from here in the Valley, and you stated the statement that you see no difference in August parking under the shade and parking under the sun. You have experienced that there is no experience.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have experienced that there is no difference between a shaded and unshaded parking space. Can you reconfirm that?
In my personal opinion, I feel when my car is 100 plus degrees, it's 100 or 110 plus degrees because of the heat, because of the sun, because of just being outside in the summer heat in the Valley. Absolutely. I feel absolutely no difference. If you're in a parking garage, maybe a little bit different story. But when you're parked at a grocery store, or you're parking at the Palm Desert Mall, or if you're parking in our parking lot, I personally feel no difference inside of my car.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Irvin.
I have more of a statement and not a question. I also drove around there.
Oh, do you want to hold that for comments?
Okay.
It's only questions until we close the public hearing. No other, Commissioner Lewin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Mr. Lassell, if you find that the vegetation and the trees are so hard to maintain, why not opt for the more permanent carport covers in your parking lot and do the shade that's required by the city of all other buildings?
The carports, we found that, installing carports, I think, would be a bit cost prohibitive to us, just from the fact of the matter of the cost of the carports. Secondly, in addition to installing carports, in order to adequately view our property within a good security system that we'd have, we would have to relocate a lot of cameras that we currently have underneath of carports, because the carports would actually block our view of what we see underneath there from the cameras that we currently have. So we just felt that it just wasn't a feasible option for us at this time.
Thank you. And that's my only question, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to close the public hearing. The matter is before the commission. Comments, and why don't we take, what I'd like to do is to take this in parts, so that first, because they're separate variances, and go first to the fence variance, and have comments, and then see if people can make the findings we have to make to approve or deny this. Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yeah, as it regards to the fence, application for variance for that fence, I'm willing to accept the staff report on that and grant the variance.
Okay, are there other comments on the fence and the findings for the variance on the fence? Seeing none, I will just say that I agree with Commissioner Hirschbein on this. It looks like this isn't an item of debate. So let's go from, and summing up what I see from the commission is that we would agree to allow the variance and make the findings we have to make on the fence. Let's go to the trees next. Comment, staff has recommended that their recommendation is that they could not make the findings that were required to waive the trees, and I would like people to comment on that. If you have comments before we have a motion. Is there anyone, Commissioner Urban?
I also went down to the location, and there was a couple of other places that were around the area that had shade. So I'm not too sure what the applicant was speaking about, but I definitely seen a lot of shade in some other places. I think it was Sea West Wind Power. They had a pretty good shade structure, and there wasn't actual trees and palm trees. So I just think that, they could provide shading.
And Commissioner Hirschbein.
What troubles me about the applicant's situation is the unilateral action the applicant chose to take in removing all the vegetation and somehow thinking that that was okay. And now when it's brought to the attention of staff, there's some backpedaling going on. And that's always troubling to me, and it leads me to thinking about this in a particular way. And that's what I want to say. That's my comment. Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Lewin.
I'd like to share with this commission that the city has development standards that it has worked long and hard to put forward. The applicant knew what was required. The applicant did the opposite, posted a bond to say that they would improve the deficiencies, but instead removed everything. I think that my personal view is that this business owner needs to follow the rules and uphold the standards that we have set, so that they are a benefit to the neighboring businesses, not a blight. That their employees do deserve shade, and our environment, our whole ecology requires plant life to support animal life, and to have one person decide that they're going to chop down every tree and bush is not acceptable to me. And I hope that this commission feels the same way. I do think that they could do carports if they don't want to do trees, but they should have to go back to the approved landscape plan, because other businesses will take a page from this, in my opinion, if we don't uphold our standards. So thank you.
Other comments? At this point, let me just ask, because I think I hear a motion to accept the staff report. The question would be what we refer them to in terms of the landscape. Do we refer this to the approved landscape plan? Do we send them to AAC to work through the appropriate shade trees that will survive out there? Yes, Commissioner Maruzzi.
In this case, I would think the AAC should get involved, because I'm concerned that if we do require the landscaping, that they might put in very immature trees that look like vertical sticks that would take years to mature, so that they have their clear view for their cameras. I think that the AAC, or maybe some of our members here in the commission, could be helpful to specify what the correct tree should be and what level of maturity the tree should be when it's planted.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
So, Commissioner Maruzzi, I think that's a great idea. I was wondering, though, in order to limit the sort of bureaucratic steps that the applicant would have to go through, can we refer it to AAC without it coming back to Planning Commission?
That's a question for the development director.
Well, I don't know. It's a procedural question. So if AAC signs off on the plan, my feeling is that we don't need to, because I don't believe we have any landscape professionals on our commission.
Madam Chair, to respond to the question, yes, it could just go back to the AAC and there would be no reason to return it to the Planning Commission.
And that's what I would be in favor of.
So if I framed a motion to accept the staff report, to send the landscape portion of this to the AAC with the requirement that they work on the tree plant, the plan of the tree, the sizes of the trees that would be put back in, and also work or approve the landscape plan in the front area in front of the fencing that the applicant has said they would put in. Does that, so we would approve staff report with a strong understanding that we're working within the city's standards in terms of landscape, and that's not, we couldn't make the variance findings, nor would we want to. And that we send it back to AAC for the particular trees, the sizing of the trees, and the rest of the landscape that would be put in. Is that specific enough?
If that's your motion, I would second it.
Fine. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Just that I want to make sure that AAC understands our concern has to do with the shading specifically.
Well, it's both the shading, and they're also offering to put plantings.
Oh, yeah, no, they need to do that, but I just want to make sure there's some awareness that the concern is that the parking lot achieve the 50% shading requirement.
Flynn, can you frame that motion for us so that we get to where Commissioner Hirschbein wants to be?
Yes, so your motion is to approve the variance for the fence, but to deny the variance for the landscaping. On the landscape plan, the applicant shall be required to submit a plan for review and approval by the Architectural Advisory Committee that conforms to the city's requirements for 50% shading. The Architectural Advisory Committee shall also review the proposed tree specimens to make sure that they are adequate in terms of installation size.
Acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, it's acceptable to the seconder, it's acceptable to me. Can you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Urban?
Aye.
Okay. Commissioner Hirschbein?
Yes.
Commissioner Lewin?
Yes.
Commissioner Song?
Yes.
Vice Chair Maruzzi? And Chair Wormuck?
Yes. This passes unanimously.
Madam Chair, I might just add, as part of your action today, one of the things we will do is work with the police department as well on the security plan and the landscaping, so that the police department can also assist the applicant in addressing security concerns with the landscape plan.
That's acceptable to me. Do we need to retake the roll?
No, we don't need to do that. It's, again, staff's commitment that we will work with the police department and the applicant to address security concerns while conforming to code.
Thank you. Okay. There is no unfinished business. There is no new business. We do have a discussion, modifications of the architectural review process. We don't have, the applicant is the city. Can I get a staff report, please?
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, the item that you have before you is just a discussion item on the architectural review process. In terms of where this has been generated from, when the Ad Hoc Plan Development District Committee was meeting in 2016 and 2017, they formulated a list of 67 recommendations relative to changes to our general plan and our zoning code. And one of the recommendations that they made was relative to reversing our architectural review process as it currently stands. The intent of that was to have items go to the Planning Commission first and then go to the Architectural Advisory Committee for review. In addition, the City Council has also discussed this issue. At their January 30th meeting of this year, one of the things that they asked the staff to look at was to look at our architectural review process. The concern of City Council is relative to shortening the time frame for applicants to move through the entitlement process. Associated with that direction, they also asked us to look at limiting the number of items that are required to go before the City Council. So there's some additional work, not only just looking at the architectural review process, but also looking at all items which require City Council approval as part of their direction to staff. In terms of our architectural review process, our process is a little bit unique from what you will find in other cities. Typically, other cities have what's called either a site plan review process or a development permit process, whereby the Planning Commission grants an entitlement based on a review of development standards, such as height, setback, conformance to parking requirements, etc. The City of Palm Springs, again, is a little bit unique in that we don't have a separate site plan review process, but rather we do the site plan review as part of an architectural review process. We might attribute that to the reason that Palm Springs looks as attractive as it does today, is that architectural review is essentially in our DNA. It's something that's very important to us. So while maintaining an architectural review process is important, I don't think it goes against the grain of our history or what we are trying to achieve in looking at reversing the process or making some modifications to the process. A number of the issues that have been identified both by City Council, by applicants, and even the Architectural Advisory Committee. Number one is the length of the process, that oftentimes it takes 2 meetings of the Architectural Advisory Committee and sometimes 2 meetings of the Planning Commission for an applicant to get through the process. And so again, City Council wants to look at how we might be able to shorten that process and wonders if reversing the order of it might assist with that. Another one of the issues that has come up, Architectural Advisory Committee has mentioned this, you as planning commissioners have mentioned this, is that architectural review occurs prior to looking at the development standards and conformance to development standards. Where this poses a difficulty is when an applicant is requesting waivers that can only be granted by the Planning Commission. The Architectural Advisory Committee is put in the difficult position of trying to evaluate the merits of a site plan when elements of that site plan might change based on the Planning Commission approval. And so there is reason for looking at changes to the process to eliminate some of those issues or correct some of those issues. We did a test case earlier this year to look at reversing the process and how that might result. You all might remember this. There was a request for a pad site at the shopping center at the northwest corner of Sunrise Way and Vista Chino for the development of a Starbucks and another smaller commercial space. We, with the permission of the applicant, reversed the process, and we took this item to the Planning Commission in March. I'm sure that you'll remember that you reviewed and approved it at your March 25th meeting, and as part of your approval, you gave the Architectural Advisory Committee a couple of elements to look at as part of the architectural review process. Unfortunately, we didn't get through the Architectural Advisory Committee on just one meeting. It did take a second meeting to do that. But I think the Architectural Advisory Committee appreciated the fact that issues relative to conformance to development standards had already been assessed by the Planning Commission. And so that helped to limit the scope of their review. And really, the need for the second review by the Architectural Advisory Committee was fine-tuning of some of the details of the building and conforming to the conditions that Planning Commission had imposed on the project. So again, it was helpful to have this test case to look at how it works and to identify some of the benefits in doing that. In terms of our discussion here today, I'm asking that you would appoint a Planning Commission subcommittee to work with staff in the development of draft regulations for revisions to our process. I would also like to take some input from you today in terms of what you would like that subcommittee to look at in terms of proposed regulations. And then one of the other things that we might consider here today is that as part of that subcommittee, we might appoint a member of the Architectural Advisory Committee to be a member of that subcommittee. What I would ask is that we limit the subcommittee to no more than 3 members, and so that might be 2 members of the Planning Commission and 1 member of the Architectural Advisory Committee. So again, this is just a discussion item. I would request that we appoint a Planning Commission subcommittee and then provide direction to the subcommittee. And with that, that concludes my presentation and comments, and I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for discussion. Thank you.
This is before us for discussion. Is there anyone who would like to start off the discussion on this? Commissioner Hirschbein.
Thank you. Based on your presentation, is it the case that we're already going to move to this process and we're just sort of layering on some requirements, or is the process change still open for discussion?
We are looking at a process change, so the process change is up for discussion.
The process changes. Okay. I'd like to point out a couple of things. The first thing is, I don't believe changing the process or the order of review is going to necessarily reduce the number of meetings that an applicant is going to have to attend. I think it's going to depend more on the quality of the application, of what's in the application, rather than the order of AAC or Planning Commission reviewing it. And the test case proved that. So that's sort of an empirical situation that confirms my analysis, that the number of meetings is not due to reducing the number of meetings is not going to be impacted by the process. It's going to be impacted by the quality of the application. A concern I have, and again, it was stated in the presentation, is that this really limits the scope that the the scope of the AAC's review. It's the fear I have, or the concern I have, is that it's going to devolve into just sort of we're just going to have some taste buds on this committee, and there's going to be sort of, no, I don't like that color. Their scope is going to be it leaves open the possibility that the scope is going to be significantly reduced, and we're not going to get the input of professional designers, professional architects, professional landscape architects involved in the process that we rely on. And I think that would be a detriment to the city. We might approve a site plan that we don't have all the architectural information, number one, and number two, there could become a time when there's not a professional architect on the Planning Commission. And because of that, we might approve a site plan that a design professional on the AAC might recognize as a problem. And you could imagine what that might be, like a building blocks access, or there's a view corridor that would like to be protected, or certain other things that we may not be aware of until the plans are more definitively developed. And so I have those concerns. To me, it's not going to fix anything to change the process. It's not going to necessarily reduce the number of meetings. And and we may be giving up an important review process in the mix, and we're kind of against it. So if it gets approved, if we are moving forward with that, I don't think I want to participate in it. I feel like it's not the right thing for us to be doing. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to comment? Commissioner Song?
I started practicing a while ago here in Palm Springs, and I have to say that compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it has exponentially become a much better flowing process. And I think Kathy and many of you had a lot to do with the fact that we're averaging to about 2 reviews at AAC when projects are challenging. I think that's a really good progress mark that we can see happening right now. My input in this is because how do we facilitate the process would be, could we consider, again, size of projects and define those sizes and then have them allow different numbers of reviews. One possibility would be that the smaller projects in which the recommendations or the opinions of AAC get passed along in still keeping the same order, which is AAC first and Planning Commission. And those will be smaller size projects, but allow the larger size projects to go through the process that we've been going through right now, which AAC has been tremendous and again, still limiting, I mean, not limiting, but we have been averaging about 2 reviews before the project comes to our countertop. So that will be my comment.
Is there anyone else? Commissioner Maruzzi.
Has the City Council tasked us with accepting the new process, and what we're doing is really just looking at some of the implementation aspects? So what is it that the council has decided that we must do?
One of the things that they want you to do is to look at the process, but they haven't said definitively it has to be that Planning Commission occurs first and Architectural Advisory Committee follows second. They want you to look at the process. There's not a foregone conclusion that it will be one way or the other. As part of looking at that process, though, one of the things they want you to investigate is how can we shorten the time frame for the entitlement process? And so that becomes one of the other aspects. And again, you've heard some discussion from your other planning commissioners that reversing the order won't necessarily shorten the time frame. There's some benefits both ways. And so I think that's why it would be beneficial to have a subcommittee kind of go through these issues and investigate them before we forward some type of recommendation to the City Council.
There being no one else who wants to make a comment, I think at this point, I've worked in a city, I worked for 6 years in Santa Monica, where we had the reverse process, Planning Commission doing some of projects that were, I think, much larger than anything Palm Springs has done. Planning Commission worked through the entitlements, the CUPs, the permits, to allow projects to happen, and then the project went, and we would usually get the full architectural. We may make comments on them when we sent them to the design review board, and they would make final changes on designs. It worked very well. The Planning Commission retained the right to handle the appeals. And I believe in the 6 years that I was there were 2 appeals of the work that the design review board did. But the process, I don't think it limited the process at all in terms of site plans and other things. It was usually a very lively discussion. There were some issues that were clearly not the purview of the Planning Commission. What I've seen here, and one of the reasons I think this makes sense, is I have seen projects where things have gone to architectural advisory and they don't have the purview to make the decisions that the Planning Commission has, and it's a confusing process not to have that. And I do think that's added time. So I'm just going to say that I think the change could be very beneficial. It could also be beneficial for the Architectural Advisory Board because they would no longer be advisory. They would be a commission that made decisions. And they would have a purview. And their decisions, if it was something that wasn't going to council after they decided it, council could pull it forward. Or if somebody appealed their decisions, it would come back here, and then council would probably have the right to pull it forward the way they do everything that we do. But I don't, I've heard over the years concerns about changing what we're doing, but I've seen 6 years of it working very well in another city, personally. And I think there are a lot of pieces in this if the recommendation goes in that direction. And a lot of them have to do with is our advisory board. Would we still appoint them? How, what happens to appeals, who decides appeals, and those kinds of things. But I think it actually enhances the Architectural Review Committee. So that's,
Well, I'm willing to be convinced. Can you tell me why you think it enhances the architectural review?
because when they come to us, if we don't like what they've done, we can and have changed it. And so they're not a final deciding body, except I think probably on a few things that go through them that don't come back to Planning Commission. So it gives them a more clear role, and that's the way that I see that it enhances them.
By giving them a clearer role.
A clearer role. I mean, what I think they have right now is a confusing role.
Mm.
And I actually I'd like to see them enhanced. They've been doing a good job. So Paul.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry to be so informal.
That's okay. I think this is a lot for me personally to get my brain around. Maybe because I'm new to the commission, so I haven't seen the back and forth. I really do understand the issues with having the AAC review something where we may not approve the actual lot lines or placement of things, and so it's almost a wasted effort over there. I wonder why we don't just try and say things that require variances first come to Planning Commission and then go to architectural. And in other cases, it can go the normal pattern, AAC and then us. I'm also a little unsure from a government perspective of, do we want two legislative bodies? Right now, what we have is an advisory committee that advises us, and we're the deciding entity. If we split the decision making, I just don't know the ramifications of all of that. If they now have, because we're appointed by council, and they're appointed by us, right? So correct. The moment they become a legislative or quasi-judicial body, there's a whole host of other issues. I think we just need to think it through carefully, because I don't know, there's just unintended consequences that I need to at least hear more about, which is, I guess, a long way of saying a subcommittee is not a bad idea to figure out some of these things. That's my comments for the group at the moment.
Flynn, what else do you need from us?
I need you to make appointments.
On the committee, I think either Maria or Michael should sit on the committee, because you both have served on AAC.
I like the idea of Maria being on the committee personally, because no. This is a real thing, because she's had the opportunity to submit plans through the process. And so not only is she familiar with the process from, our side, both Planning Commission and AAC, but I'm making hand movements, you can't see them. She's also familiar with the process from the other side, having submitted the plans and gone through the process. So I think she'd be a much more valuable professional member of the subcommittee than myself. That'd be my recommendation.
Maria, are you open to serving on the subcommittee if I appoint you right now?
Of course.
Good.
Sounds like you need two, don't you?
I do need two.
Kathy, I would nominate Kathy as the second. because of your experience as head of commission back in the time when it was pretty difficult in Palm Springs.
And also her experience in other jurisdictions.
Flynn, do we need 3 people from our committee, or do we want to leave one opening for AAC?
I would recommend that we keep it to 2 planning commissioners and 1 member of AAC, so that way we have input from a member of AAC as well.
Fine. So move. I don't think this requires a vote.
No, it does not require a vote. So I've got my direction from you. I've got my subcommittee members. We'll invite a member of the Architectural Advisory Committee, and then staff will contact you. We'll do our subcommittee meetings via video conferencing.
Okay.
Well, I'd just like to say thanks to both of you for volunteering for that task.
Volunteering.
You got drafted. You were definitely conscripted, but you were gracious.
Could I ask one question before we finish this topic? Flynn, can you give us an observation of when projects are denied and they're going for appeal to City Council? How are those projects received? 2 things that I'm thinking about it is, one would be the opinion of, wow, we spend way too much time. This should have been brought up way before, and we cite opposite to Planning Commission and AAC, or the alternative, which is they agree with the reason why we have rejected, and therefore they don't approve the appeal. If you can give us a little more background on what has been the track record, even though there's only been few projects that have gone up all the way to City Council.
Yeah, there, as you say, there isn't really a good track record to judge in terms of appeal. I can think of one case, the medical clinic on Sunrise. That was one that was recently appealed to the City Council. And in that particular case, I don't think that they disagreed with the Planning Commission in terms of your recommendations. What they did have to do, however, was try and find some way forward for the applicant. Understanding the comments that you all had made proved to be very helpful in trying to do that. So I think at this point where we are with the City Council and the Planning Commission, City Council has generally been very supportive of the recommendations or the determinations that are made by the Planning Commission. And I don't see many cases where the City Council has reversed the Planning Commission action as it comes to design review or architectural review.
Thank you.
Moving right along, Planning Commission reports, requests, and comments. Are there any? Commissioner Hirschbein.
I just had one question for the planning director. There was an article in the Desert Sun today noting that the county was looking at purchasing a hotel or motel to provide homeless services and housing. Would an application be required to go through Planning Commission for something like that?
I believe that it would, looking at the zoning for the site. I don't know that the county would be exempt from local regulations in terms of developing a facility there.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
My friends in the real estate world have been telling me that Palm Springs is certainly a hot market right now for residential. And it makes me wonder why projects like Cody Place, which we approved the banners for recently, seems to have stopped construction. The sign says spring 2020. I'm sure there are other questions like this. The mayor, I know at the beginning of the year, wanted to update quarterly the public with the status of these project. So I guess I'm asking the planning director, are you in contact with, let's say, the Toll Brothers and finding out what's going on with this project, given that there is such strong demand apparently for residential real estate in this town?
I will just tell the Planning Commission generally, based on the number of projects that we have going through our office in terms of private development, no, we don't have the manpower to contact all of the applications that are under development. With the specific projects recently, for example, Cody Place, which is well on its way, we had meetings with the applicant team back in December to finalize the review of their plans to make sure they were in conformance with the conditions of approval, et cetera, that they have everything that they need to really move forward. What we've seen is with the pandemic, even though housing is one of the critical industries that has been allowed to move forward under the pandemic, there has still been issues with the private firms being able to get everything that they need in terms of the engineering work and some other things, getting workers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's primarily a byproduct of the pandemic that we've been seeing with certain projects that were poised to move forward and have everything in place, but haven't been under construction under the last several months.
Are any under construction?
Yeah, there are some that are under construction. For example, the Vibe project continues to build. Miralon, Woodbridge Pacific there is continuing to build. So there are a number that are in the process of building. It's ones that I think already had their building permits in place prior to the pandemic hitting and certain restrictions going into place.
Commissioner Maruzzi, Toll Brothers has been building out their remaining units at Ascena, and they've been building for the last 5 months.
And it's just everything is stopped at Cody Place, and they were so close. It looked like they even had the model home about to open, but there's no banners. There's nothing going on.
Commissioner Lewin, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to find out the item 2A that was pulled, New Church 2 for a time extension. We had continued that from several months ago, and then rather abruptly it was pulled. And I just wanted to know from the director, is this matter settled now that the applicant has pulled this, or is this going to come back to us again?
No, the item will not come back to you. The item on the agenda 2A was an extension of the 2016 entitlements for the project. Now that City Council has approved their new development plan, there is no need to maintain those entitlements, and that's the basis that the applicant withdrew the application. So thankfully, no, it will not be showing up on your agenda again.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other comments? The planning director's report.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Irvin.
I've noticed lately we haven't had too many items on our agenda. I know we're probably going black in August. Is there anything where we're going to see anything in the upcoming months with more items on the agenda or more things to discuss?
Yes, we will. We have a couple of items that are still going through the environmental review process that weren't ready for this agenda that will come on to your September agenda. So we do have a number of things in process that will be coming forward. And actually, that's a wonderful segue to one of the things under the planning director's report. We wanted to have a study session here at the end of July to discuss the general plan and specifically some of the work that our general plan steering committee has been doing. Would the planning commissioners be available for a study session at 5:30 p.m. on July the 29th if we are able to put together materials for you? If I could just kind of get a general indication from you if you all would be available on that date. Vice Chair Maruzzi, Mr. Hirschbein, Member Song, Chair Wermuck, Mr. Irvin, would you be available?
Give me a second. I'm looking at the
Okay.
my calendar right now.
And Mr. Lewin?
I was checking my calendar. I think I would be available.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I can do the 29th.
Okay. What we will do, Madam Chair, is we need to have a subcommittee meeting of the steering committee and then a meeting of the steering committee, which we plan to have in the next 2 weeks. I will give you a notice if we are able to get that completed prior to the 29th so that we can have the study session. We're at the point where we need to have some decisions from the Planning Commission, some input from the Planning Commission, and we'd like to do that before you go dark in August. And so that's why we're trying to squeeze it in there. And so I appreciate you being available for that. The next thing that I wanted to mention is that with the City Council approval of the budget at their last City Council meeting, we are in the process of reorganizing the planning, building, engineering, and sustainability departments and combining them into one department. And so you will now have a development services department in place of what was previously 4 departments. I will be serving as the director of that combined department. Serving under me will be the city engineer, Mr. Joel Montalvo, and our acting building official, Mr. Alberto Gradilla. So we do have a new organization. We're in the process of working through that reorganization right now, but just wanted to make you aware of that. That will not result in any significant changes to how we operate our Planning Commission or Architectural Advisory Committee. We do, unfortunately, with the layoffs, have a reduction in our staff, so that does impact us in terms of being able to turn things around quickly. But overall, I think the reorganization of the department will help us to work a little bit more efficiently in terms of permits and approvals. So we're very pleased to see that and are moving forward with those changes. Other than that, the Planning Commission will be dark during the month of August, and then our next regularly scheduled meeting will be on September the 9th, and I will notify you of a proposed study session on July the 29th as soon as we are able to confirm those arrangements. With that, that's all we have for this evening, Madam Chair, and we are finished with our agenda.
Madam Chair, we can't hear you.
Flynn, the adjournment on this says a study session on July 22nd, but it is we're adjourning to 5:30 p.m. on July 29th, 2020 for study session.
That is correct.
And I think this meeting is over. Thank you, everyone.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Commission.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.